Today on Stock Charts in Focus, we're taking a look at one of the most important tools on the site that you might not be using. That is seasonality. Allows you to see monthly price performance trends for any security over a customizable period of time that you get to choose. Now, there's been a lot of talk, especially at this time of year, about seasonal weakness in September, things that typically happen in October. So as we head into year end, these seasonality charts become even more important. You're going to see exactly how to bring them into your own analysis on today's show. So we got a lot to cover. Of course, you know what it is. It's all new. It's all here. It's Stock Charts in Focus. All right, my friends, welcome to the show, Stock Charts in Focus. Of course, our product focus show here on the channel, where we dig into the site, dive into the tools, walk you through those features, and ultimately help you get more value out of the tools and features around the Stock Charts platform. My name is Grayson Roze, Vice President of Operations here at StockCharts.com. Wonderful to be back with you. We were off last week, so good to be back in the saddle here for another show, and one that really could not be more important at this time of year in particular. Now, we've talked about seasonality on the show in the past, but it's been quite a long time. And right now, like I said, is a truly important time to be talking about this tool. It's something that you can bring into your own analysis, not just at the individual stock level, but especially at that market level, at the sector level, really throughout any type of security that you are following, anything that you are thinking about on a week-to-week or month-to-month kind of basis. Seasonality can be a factor in the way that you are looking at that. So we're going to dive into this. We're going to show you exactly how these charts work. And we'll also talk a little bit about why they are important. So let's jump over to the site and take a look. So first and foremost, of course, we can't talk about the seasonality charts without talking about how to access them. So we are starting here on our charts and tools page. You can get here by clicking on the charts and tools link in the top left corner of any page around the site. Once you are here, scroll down this page just a little bit and you'll find a card for the seasonality tool. You can type in a ticker symbol right there and click go. You'll be off to the races. Now, one other thing that I do want to also point out is that at the top of any page around the site, you can also access the seasonality tool. So you can open up this little menu, typically says either Sharp Chart or ACP, select seasonality from that menu, and then type in the ticker symbol that you want to take a look at. We are going to start with SPY. We're going to take a look at the S&P 500 ETF, one of the biggest securities out there. So you hit go and you are off to the races. Now, seasonality charts, as we mentioned, allow you to see monthly price performance trends over a specific period of time. So this allows you to say, hey, what does SPY typically do in September? Does it typically go up? Does it typically go down? What are the percentage moves on average over the last couple of years? And what's the percentage of time that this security goes up or down? You can answer all of that with these charts. Now, there are a couple of numbers scattered around here, so we're going to take a look at each of those, show you exactly what they mean. And then we'll talk a little bit about kind of why this is important and how you can bring it into your own analysis. Again, lots of talk right now about seasonal weakness in September and things that typically happen in October. We kind of see a mix in October. We also then, of course, start to get into what typically happens in the year-end couple of months in November and December and off into to January and February as the calendar year rolls over. So those are the types of questions that we're going to be asking and answering with these seasonality charts. So first and foremost, we'll take a look at how to access all of this stuff, how to use these charts. Down at the very bottom is actually going to be where you want to start. There's a little slider down here with a number on it. Now, you can move this slider back and forth to see different periods of time, but you can also customize the number of years that you want to think about. So by default, these seasonality charts are going to say, what are the average moves over the last 5 years? This is what this 5 represents here. If you want to add more time, though, you can drag this out up to 20 years. So you can average any security that you're looking at between 1 and 20 years worth of data. So in this case, when we drag this thing out to 20, we're saying what are the monthly trends, seasonal historical trends for SPY across all the 12 months of the calendar year over the last 20 years. Now, 20 in some cases is great, especially if you're looking at the indexes. If you're looking at an individual stock, you might want to go a little bit narrower. Maybe you want sort of more recent data. You want to take some of those older years and kick those out. It really depends on the way that you want to think about it. For our purposes, let's take a look at the last 10 years worth of SPY. Again, you can see how to manipulate this. And if you want to look at a different sort of chunk of 10 years going back through time, of course, like we said, you can drag that back and forth. Next up, of course, you're going to look at the seasonality charts themselves. So as you can see, we have a bar for each month of the year, January through December. The key thing is that there are two numbers for each bar. And what that tells you is the percentage of time that SPY or whatever symbol you're looking at has gone up in that month, and then the average price change in that month over the range that you are looking at. So if we take a look, for instance, at September, because there's been so much talk about the historical weakness of the market in the month of September, we can see that at the very top, we have a 40 on that bar. What that means is that over the last 10 years, SPY has gone up, has increased in price in the month of September, only 4 out of the 10 months, or 40% of the time. So we can see that typically, if you kind of think about this in the reverse, right? Typically, 60% of the time, SPY is actually going to go down in the month of September, or has gone down in the month of September. SPY has been a gainer only 40% of the time in the month of September. Now, if we compare that to, for instance, April or May or July, where SPY has typically climbed higher 90% of the time, these are historically strong months versus historically weak months like September and actually like the month of January as well. The number at the bottom of these seasonality charts is going to tell you the average percentage move for this security in that month. So we can see that, for instance, if we compare January and September, which have actually the same percentage of the time SPY moving higher, 40% of the time SPY has moved higher in those months, we can see that the move has actually been quite different. In the month of January, the average gain for SPY is 0.4%. If we look at September, we can see that SPY actually averages a loss of 2.2% in the month of September. So September is historically one of the weakest months of the year for the S&P 500. Now, what this can do is bring a little bit more context to the moves that you're seeing in the markets. The way I always like to explain seasonality to people is it brings more context, kind of brings more clarity or more data to the moves that the market is making. So when you see SPY going down in the month of September, it might not be quite as surprising because it's really kind of following its historical pattern. If you see the market rising in April and May, we know that that's not very odd. That's kind of following that historical pattern. So again, this is really there to kind of bring a little bit more context to what you're seeing in the market. One way that I like to describe this to people is if I told you, hey, it's snowing, and it's the month of January, you might say, oh, okay, cool. That's nice. Have some fun out there in the snow. If I called you up and I said, hey, it's snowing and it's the month of July, you might go, what the heck? It's snowing in July. That's a little bit exciting. That's a little bit unusual. So again, that can sort of bring some context to the weather patterns. We do this with weather. We do this with so many different things. Analyzing historical patterns, different times of year when we see pops and drops and things, or strength or weakness, or pickups in traffic, those kinds of things. So we can do the exact same thing with any security out there in the markets. That's what these seasonality charts are really intended to do. Bring a little bit more context to the moves that you are seeing out there in the markets. Now, this can be fantastic for indexes. This can be fantastic for sectors. It can also work well for individual securities. So for instance, if we come up here and we type in something like Apple, we can see that on the individual security level, we can use seasonality in the exact same kind of way. We can drag our slider out. We can pick our number of years that we want to look back over. Maybe in this case, we want to do, let's say, 15 years worth of Apple. We can analyze historical trends for Apple and individual security at the same time. We can do this, like I said, for sectors of the market. Right now, we're seeing a little bit of renewed strength in energy, for instance. So we can start to look at seasonality for the energy sector. Again, drag this back out. Maybe we want our 10 years worth of data. We can see that the strength that we're seeing in XLE energy right now is actually somewhat unusual. Typically, October is not a strong month for XLE, although the average move is a positive. It is 2.1%. So again, these seasonality charts can bring a little bit more context, a little bit more information, a little more history to what you're seeing. One thing that I always like to say, I get this question a lot from investors, from traders, from people that are out there starting to learn a little bit more about seasonality. People say, hey, how can I actually use this to make decisions? How does this really help me? Well, again, if you think that it adds more context, it can also give you some interesting sort of backdrops to think about the markets, right? If you're thinking about selling something, for instance, because it's a little bit weak, but it's historically a weak month, like September. Let's say you're thinking about selling SPY because that weakness in September is scaring you. Well, if you know that that's historically a weak time of the year for SPY, for instance, then that drop is a little less scary, right? Again, it's snowing in January. It's not quite as painful to see that kind of thing. If you're thinking about buying something, it might be interesting to buy in those weaker months, especially at the index level, or might be more interesting to sell in some of those stronger months, different things like that. So again, seasonality can just kind of bring a little bit more context to what you are seeing. It's also, I always like to say, a reason to look. So especially at the individual security level, when you're looking at something, again, we'll go back to Apple. If you're looking at an individual security and you're seeing some of these really, really strong months, for instance, the month of July here in Apple, over the last 5 years, 100% of the time, all 5 of the last 5 years, Apple has gained in the month of July, and the average move has been 10.2%. This is a great reason to look, as I would call it. So the next July, when it comes up, we know that historically Apple is strong in that month. It might be a good reason to start looking at it in May and June to say, hey, if I'm seeing the charts continue to move higher, Apple is setting up and seems like it might continue higher into the month of July, you know that you have that strong tailwind of kind of the seasonal or historical patterns there in Apple. So it can provide, again, a little bit of context, a little bit of history, and a reason to look at some of these securities. Now, one of the other really interesting things that we can do with seasonality, you might have noticed this other box right up at the top of the screen. So this can be used not just on an absolute basis for one security at a time. We can also use seasonality for relative strength or comparing between two different securities. So for instance, if we want to see how Apple performs relative to the total market, relative to the S&P 500, I might add, we can actually type in another symbol right up at the top in that comparison box. And now what we're looking at is, as you can see here, the percentage of months in which Apple has outperformed that comparison symbol, that benchmark, for that period of time. So we can actually use this to see kind of relative trends that exist out there in the markets. For instance, if we drag this out to 10 years here of Apple versus the S&P 500, now we can start to see, hey, when is Apple outperforming the market and when is Apple underperforming the market historically throughout the year. Again, a little bit more context, a little bit more of a kind of a reason to look, and a little bit more added kind of data or perspective on some of those securities that you are looking at. I find this relative view particularly interesting with sectors. So if we look at something, let's go back to XLE. We look at the relative performance of XLE versus the S&P 500 over a specific period of time. This is where we can start to get some really, really interesting insights into the different sectors of the market. If we look at something like XLK, for instance, this is going to have a little bit more outperformance than XLE, but we can look at things like industrials and see, different kind of relative views from a seasonal perspective over the past couple of years, whatever we want to make it. So a couple of different things that you can do with these seasonality charts, and again, all intended to bring a little bit more context to your analysis. Now, I want to show you one other thing, because as you can see, right now we're typing in one ticker symbol at a time. We do have another view, though, which is the ChartList view, which makes it a little bit easier to flip through some of these symbols. So I mentioned that I like to use these seasonality charts and that relative comparison, especially for the sectors of the market. So one thing that you can actually do is create a chart list that has those sectors and then use the seasonality view to easily flip through the ticker symbols that are in that list. You could also do this for indexes. If you have the major indexes of the market loaded up into a chart list, you can use that view to click through those symbols. Or for a watch list, if you want to use this for individual securities, the sky is the limit when it comes to this kind of thing. So let's jump over to the dashboard and we'll take a look at how this works. Of course, if you are a Stock Charts member, you have access to the members dashboard. Once you come here, you can create chart lists in your account. So for instance, I have a chart list that I like to look at almost every day. That is my sector chart list. You can see this has all of those different sector ETFs in the market. Once you jump into a chart list like this, you have access to a number of different chart list views. Of course, the traditional ones being summary, chart list view, chart book, different things like that. We also have a seasonality view as one of the options for these chart lists though. So if you click on that, this will actually pull in all of those different ticker symbols for that chart list. So we can quickly flip through seasonality charts for anything in this list. You can see now we're jumping into XLC, Communication Services, and all I have to do, instead of typing in one ticker symbol at a time, all I have to do is click through this list to get all of those different seasonality charts sort of one at a time for anything in this list. This is a really nice way, again, to review major indexes that you want to follow on a seasonal basis, sectors of the markets, industry groups that you want to follow as well. Really, the sky's the limit. If you can think it, you can do it here with these chart lists and that seasonality view. But again, this is a little bit sort of quicker, easier way to review those seasonality charts for the symbols that you are following. Check out that chart list view. It is an important one. So that's going to do it for us on the show today. A quick hit here, reviewing seasonality. But again, I always love to show people this, especially at this time of year. It becomes very, very important for bringing a little more context, a little bit more of a data-driven kind of historical perspective to what you're seeing in the markets. If we see the markets do things that follow those seasonal patterns, it's important to know that they're following those seasonal patterns, and it's not quite as unusual, not quite as crazy to see the markets follow expected paths. If we start to see the markets do things that are unexpected, that don't follow those seasonal historical trends out there, that's where things get a little bit more interesting. So seasonality is a fantastic way to think about the markets, and this seasonality tool makes it very, very easy, again, for any security that you are following. Indexes, sectors, industry groups, or even down to individual securities. And of course, you also have that ability to compare to a benchmark, kind of relative seasonality. Very, very cool what you can do with those charts. So hopefully this has been helpful for you. One of those little corners of the Stock Charts website that I always love to show people, a very, very powerful tool that hopefully you've seen and now in action and will start to bring into your own analysis. I want to thank you again for joining me on the show today. It's been a lot of fun to be back with you for another episode of Stock Charts in Focus. Remember, we do this every Friday. Again, helping you get more value out of stock charts, digging into those tools and features, ultimately just trying to show you different corners of the platform. Make sure that you're aware of all the powerful features that are out there on the Stock Charts platform. There is a ton, so we've always got things to dig into every Friday here on the show. My name is Grayson, Vice President of Operations here at StockCharts.com. Great to be with you. I'll see you again soon for another episode of Stock Charts in Focus, but until then, chart on, my friends.